Those things that we think are success markers don't make you happy. You need to find something that will never go away, that you can define your hope and happiness in, because everything else can be taken away from you. I can tell you one you need when your son dies is you need to believe that there's a resurrection and that you get to be reunited with your family again someday.
Dr. Lee Warren, renowned neurosurgeon, podcaster, and writer. You were in the war. You saw fire, wounds. When you came home from the war, your son, unfortunately, passed away at a very young age. Neurosurgery, you see patients come in all the time that are dealing with life-threatening ailments constantly. It does pull you away, and it's hard to fight through. Can you comment on that fight to get that hope and get that faith back?
Society wants to tell us a lot of things about God. He'll never give you anything more than you can handle. That's not in the Bible. The Bible never says anywhere that we're going to have a pain-free life. It doesn't make us that promise. The truth is,
the way that we talk to ourselves. I talk to myself really negatively. When I talk negatively to myself, I feel like I'm not impacting anybody. Like I can be mean to myself and I'm the only one who will know it.
The big thing is you can change your brain by changing how you think. It's not silly, and it's not just positive thinking or self-help when we say that. It's true. You literally change the chemical makeup of your brain. Dopamine and serotonin, GABA, and all these other neurotransmitters are the things that make you feel the things that you feel in your life. But the most important thing is to understand.
Sorry, I just need a second. Wow. This is probably the first time that I've been podcasting that you've just changed my mind on the spot. Hope. Definitely one of those things in life that might be overlooked sometimes. That massive thing is going to come for you. I'm sorry. I don't want to start this podcast off all doom and gloom, but that big thing in life will come. And when it comes to test you, if you don't have hope and if you don't have faith, it's going to be a very difficult time. Now, whether you're religious or not, I think there is a lot to gain out of today's conversation with Dr. Warren, especially when it comes to how we talk to ourselves so that we can have hope and we can have faith. Hope is the First Dose is an incredible book. I can't recommend it enough. It's available now. And after today's conversation, I think it'll be pretty evident as to why you need to pick up your copy. If you enjoyed today's conversation and you want to see even more incredible conversations going forward, please follow along and leave a rating. It really is the best way to grow the show, and I can't thank you enough for being a supporter. Thank you for tuning into the R20s podcast. Without further ado, Dr. Lee Warren. I want to start off with how you started the book, and it's 2 quotes out of the Bible that Jesus is saying, and it's, "In this world, you will have trouble," but at the same time, he's also saying, "I came to the world so you would have an abundant life."
Yeah.
And that right there is the absolute thesis of where I think a lot of young people get caught up, is they see 2 statements like that and they sound like they would be contradictory in nature, and they say to themselves, how could I possibly have faith in God? How can I possibly have hope in God that these promises are going to be true when I can't even understand what I'm reading and I can't understand the world around me? And that's what causes them to lose faith, and it's what causes them to lose hope. So I want to start by just defining our terms, because I think a lot of people will mix up faith and hope and they'll use them interchangeably. But I think there's a key difference that needs to be distinguished. So if we could just start, how would you go about describing the difference between faith and hope to somebody?
Yeah, so I look at it like this. Faith is the belief that God can do the things that he says that he can do. The faith is the belief that God is who he says he is and can do what he says he can do. Hope is the belief that he'll do those things for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
he's this big God who can do all these big things, but will he do them for me? And I see that as a subtle difference between those 2 things. They're tied up with one another. Faith is the evidence of things not seen, right? So I think it's this ability to understand that he wants to do and can do and will do those things for you too.
I think with a lot of young people, it's what you said right there, and seeing that is what we get caught up on, because we either don't see something that we want to see really badly, and that's some evidence of divine intervention or God at work, or we do see something that's quite contrary to what we think would be a form of divine intervention. We see tragedy, we see trauma take place in our lives all the time, and it really constricts us from having this type of belief. But it's also this idea that we're able to convince ourselves sometimes that what we see is truth, but it's not the truth. And it's something that you talk about in the book too, how we can easily in our own minds come up with a version of the truth that is not rooted in reality.
That's right.
Especially when it comes to reading the scriptures, because to me that's where I find the truth. That's where I see divine intervention taking place. How do you go about reading the scriptures yourself so you don't get caught up in maybe an emotional state when you see 2 contradictory statements like we just talked about, that it might get you to think about, oh, I don't know what I'm thinking here. I don't know what's true and what's not. And how do you go about taking away the emotion out of it and just focusing on what God is trying to get across in his message?
Well, that's a great question. I think the big thing is number one, the Bible never, despite popular opinion and people saying that it says this, the Bible never says anywhere that we're going to have a pain-free life. It doesn't. It
Hmm.
doesn't make us that promise. What the promise that it makes us is that when we have pain, He'll be there with us, and that someday He's going to redeem all of that pain for something that matters and something that's permanent. So those are the first two things I would say. The
Yeah.
second thing is anytime the Bible seems to contradict itself, if you spend time in it and not in what people say about it, you will find that it doesn't really contradict itself. And the good example is what you brought up. John 16:33, the first half of that verse, Jesus says, "In this world you will have trouble." If you stop there, it sounds bad, but if you keep reading, he says, "But take heart, I have overcome the world." Right? He's the guy that came here and did everything right and paid for our sins and died and had the power to be resurrected. And we don't serve a dead God, we serve a living God because he
Yeah.
overcame death. So he has overcome the world, which means it can be overcome. John 10:10 is the other thing that I hold in tension with John 16:33. So in this world you'll have trouble. It's a promise from Jesus. In John 10:10, he says, "The thief," he's talking about the enemy, Satan, life, "comes to steal, kill, and destroy." So life is going to come at you, Tom, and it's going to try to steal your joy and kill you and destroy your hope and all those things. But he says, "But I came here that you could have an abundant life." And he's
Yeah.
not talking about heaven. He's not talking about eternal life in that context. He's saying, I want your life now to matter and to bring you joy and to bring you hope and to bring you happiness. And I came here so that you could do that. So there's two things that he says that seem to contradict one another, but they don't. We're going to have trouble, but he's overcome the world. And there's somebody who wants to take away your hope, and he's not going to let them. So to
Yeah.
me, that's a great example of that. That if you spend enough time in the Word of God, it's living and it's active, and it doesn't contradict itself. It fulfills itself.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. And I agree with it, but at the same time, I still struggle personally all the time to
We all
believe it
do.
is actually true. I absolutely. Oh, I couldn't agree more that we all do. And it's those traumatic events that take place in our life. It's referred to in the book as TMT. That massive thing is coming, and it's going to come
Yep.
for all of us at one point or another. And if it hasn't yet, I'm sorry to say to anyone listening that it will at one point. And those are the trials and tribulations that are going to hit us, and it's going to make us say to ourselves, I know everything that God has told me, and as much as I want to believe it, I just can't. At sometimes it just feels like there's something that's pulling me away, and I hear that all the time, even from people my age, where they feel like they're just being pulled away a little bit more, and they don't want to come back to the light. They don't feel like that hope is that prison for them, that they can see the light through the darkness. And
Yeah.
you have had so many experiences in life. You had an incredible career. You've had an incredible personal life, and we could talk for hours about your stories. And I would love to actually just talk with you for hours about your stories. But you were in the war. You saw a lot of traumatic
Yep.
experiences. You saw fire. You saw wounds that no person should ever have to see. When you came home from the war, your son unfortunately passed away at a very young age. And
Yep.
neurosurgery, you see patients come in all the time that are dealing with life threatening ailments constantly. That's enough, just a fraction of that, to break a person completely. And they would never have faith, they would never have hope. And yet you've kept fighting through over and over again. So I don't want you to go into detail about every little aspect of life that has been thrown at you, but I do want to just talk about your process as to, like we just said, it does pull you away and it's hard to fight through. But can you comment on that fight to get that hope and
Yeah.
get that faith back?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is that looking back, I'm older than you. I'm 54, so
Mhm.
I'm super old for your listeners. So I'm 54, still working as a neurosurgeon and still practicing and all of that. But what I've noticed is looking back over the course of my life, and you hit some of those big touchstones, and I've been through the war and PTSD and a divorce and a remarriage and a blending of families, and then we lost our son and all those things that happened. And what I can see in retrospect, and that's an important word we should come back to later, I
Yeah.
can see that every hard thing that I ever went through prepared me to be more resilient and to better be able to handle the next hard thing that came along. And so, although I talk about the massive thing that happens in life, the truth is you're going to have more than one massive
Yeah.
thing that occurs in your life. There's more than one trauma and tragedy and massive thing that occurs. And so, what I can say is, when I went to war, I wasn't prepared emotionally for some of the things that I saw. and had to do. I wasn't prepared to get mortared 100 times and see people blown up and burned up and all that stuff that you see in war. But but somehow there's this verse in Psalm 144:1 that says, "He has prepared my hands for war and my fingers for battle." And I realized after I got home, like, holy cow, I wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't trained for that, but I got through it. And every time a
Yeah.
bad situation came, he would give us exactly what we needed to solve the problem and take care of the patient, or he would send somebody to send an email and encourage me at just the right time. And right. So there was always something like manna for that day that got me through it. And in the back end, when my brain was going crazy with all the post traumatic stress and all of that, he was there in those moments to encourage me and never let me give up. And so even on the
Yeah.
days when I thought I was going to give up, I would hear a scripture or remember something that somebody had said to me, and it would be just enough to kind of nudge me through that towards light again. And what I realized in that experience and all the ones that follow is that if you build your life on circumstances having to go a certain way in order for you to be happy or to have faith or to have hope or whatever, the problem
Yeah.
is circumstances don't ever go your way. And you
Yeah.
can look around and you can see that they don't ever go anybody's way. You think of the richest person you ever heard of, or the most famous celebrity, or the biggest movie star, and what do you hear every few years? One of those people becomes an alcoholic or gets a divorce or commits suicide or something happens, because those things that we think are success markers don't make you happy.
Yeah.
And so the bottom line is, you need to find something that will never go away, that you can define your hope and happiness in, because everything else can be taken away from you,
Yeah.
Tom. And I'm just a good testament to that. I'm just this normal kid from Oklahoma who went to med school and became a doctor and got married and went to war and did all these things. And everything in my life at different times has been taken from me.
Yeah.
So how do you find your hope again? Well, you keep building it on the things that are promised to be true. So when you find one promise from God where he says, "I'll be close to you when you're brokenhearted," and then you're brokenhearted and he's close to you, then that gives you credibility to believe another promise. And I can tell you one you need when your son dies is, you need to believe that there's a resurrection and that you get to be reunited with your family again someday for eternity.
Yeah.
You need that promise to be true. So you're either just delusional and you're grasping at straws, or you've got a track record, and that's what I've landed on, a track record of lots of other biblical promises that turned out to be true when I needed them to be. So I can trust that that one is too. And then I can have hope in that long game of, yeah, there's going to be some hard stuff here, but I'm aiming at a target that I'm going to hit, and it's going to be good for me.
Yeah. From Broken Bow, Oklahoma, all the way to now, it's
Yep.
just quite the journey. Where
Yeah.
I find that word retrospect. I do want to come back to that now, where you talk about the journey that you've been on, and I can only imagine when you were growing up. I looked up Broken Bow. 4,000 people is
It was
definitely
2000 when I grew up. Yeah.
that's insane. That I think my hometown is maybe 20,000, 30,000, so a
Yeah.
little bit bigger. But
Yeah.
to come from, definitely you referred to it as a small town, to the place where you are now, where you can hear the word of God, and you're not only hearing it, but you're able to spread it to people. 70 countries, I think, was what I read, is how many people are listening to the
Yeah. The
podcast currently.
newsletter, 70, and the podcast has been downloaded 114 last week. So yeah, it's getting out
That's
there.
incredible. That's absolutely incredible. But it's exactly like you said. You clung on to the word and you chose not to let it go. And it's that second step where I think is the key to helping other people. And that's what you're doing right now, is that you're paying it forward. And
Yeah.
that's that second step where I think a lot of us will never get to, because we can't even grasp hope first. And that's what you're doing with the book, is you're helping
Yeah.
people find that first step. And then I really hope that a lot of people will be able to take that second step once they've seen, in this case, read the word, that somebody else has done it before them. And I think that's
Yeah.
really key to see that you're not alone in what we're doing. And you're a prime example of, there is hope to be had, and you can have it at any time that you want, and you make the choice today. You can
That's
always
right.
choose today, and that was the name of your podcast when you had the first
You start
iteration
today.
around.
Yeah.
You start today. When you had to go through these events, how long did it take you to say to yourself, okay, today's the day that I'm going to make a change. I'm going to start living my life to honor the people that I've lost in my life, to honor the people that are hurt, and I'm going to carry them with me, as opposed to this idea of, I don't need to move on, but I need to carry them with me as I go throughout my actions, as I go throughout my day, as I plan my life to be the best version of myself.
That's a really good question. Part of the answer is it was our daughter, Kaylin, actually, who's not much older than you. She's 27. Um, and Kaylin was a junior in high school when Mitch died, and so she was the only one of our kids that was still at home with us. And it was about 2 weeks after he died that uh, walked into the living room one morning. She was dressed and ready to go to school, and we had this little table set up with all these cards that people had sent, after Mitch's funeral, and little pictures, and it's kind of like a little, shrine sort of thing to
Yeah.
Mitch. And she was standing there, and she was talking to a picture of her brother, her big brother, who had died, and I heard her say, "Mitch, we'll never move on. We can't ever move on from losing you, but I've got to carry on with my life. I've got to get back into the things and reconnect with the people and get back in the church. And I've got to carry on. I know you want me to." And she had that conversation with him, and I heard it, and it ministered to me, because that's exactly it. What you just said is, after a period of time, after this massive thing occurs in your life,
Yeah.
you're going to have to make a decision. Like this is going to be the thing that defines you, that sticks you in this place. And a lot of people do get stuck after trauma, after, especially when it's a death or a violation or an abuse or something. They get stuck, and that's all they can think about, and all they can revolve around, and their life becomes defined by that thing. And those people. These are the people that turn to alcohol, or they turn to, never coming out of the immediate grief cycle. And those folks, it becomes the only thing they can see, and their whole life is defined by that event that occurred to them. And we had to make a decision. And I think it was helped by the fact that we had other children to take care of. And we had a granddaughter that was brand new. Our granddaughter was born on the day we buried Mitch, which was devastating and a whole nother part of the story.
Yeah.
But we had people that needed us to show them that you can get back on your feet and move forward. And so we saw it as a responsibility to not become defined by that thing. And then a friend who, well, not really a friend, an acquaintance of mine who was an orthopedic surgeon, and we kind of knew each other, but we didn't really work together. And he was one of these kind of muscle, kind of weightlifting, sort of jock kind of guys. I'm more of an academic. I'm kind of a mathlete. But he was this big guy. And the first time I saw him after Mitch died, he walked right up to me. And this is a good lesson for how you handle people when you don't know what to say. He walked right up to me, Tom, and he put his hands on my shoulders and he looked me right in the eye. And he said, "Lee, I don't know what to say to you. Like, I've been thinking about what I was going to say when I saw you, and I don't know what to say, but I know this one thing." I said, "What do you know?" And he said, "I know that your son would not want one death to cause two deaths. You can't die. Like, even in your heart, like, he doesn't want you to die. You've got to carry it. You got to find a way to live and honor him with your life. That's what I know. And that's all I got to say to you." And he just kind of braced me and he walked off. And that's all he said. And that was the most important thing anybody said to me. It was way more important than things a lot of the Christians said. I guess, God needed another angel, or those kinds of things that people say. It was, "Mitch doesn't want you to die." And that's exactly it. I know my son would want me to stand up to this thing and carry on in a way that would motivate other people to find hope again and honor his life by using his loss to help other people. And that was the most important thing anybody said. So you find hope by holding on to things that you know to be true, and by finding meaning and purpose in some other aspect of your life that you can use to redeem the loss in a way that makes it not all for loss. Does that make sense?
100%. And that's so powerful. I was having a conversation a couple weeks ago with another gentleman. His name is Colin Campbell, and he wrote a book. It was titled Finding the Words. It's a grief book,
Yeah.
and it's about finding the words as to what you say to someone who's in the grieving process. He has quite the story as well. His two teenage kids were killed in a car crash.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely terrible. It was a tough interview for me to go through. Just having the conversation. It was really my first kind of jump into something like that was really heavy, and I was really
Yeah.
appreciative of the conversation, and it really has helped me with this one too, where we had the same kind of talk where we talked about how people would come up to him and they would say, there are no words, there's nothing to say, and that didn't help at all. And then people
Yeah.
would say kind of the opposite. They would say, "Oh my gosh, I don't get how you're just not drunk all the time. I would have just died if it were me, if that were
Yeah.
my kid who just died." And his response would be, "Well, first of all, my kids were killed by a drunk driver. So why would I be drinking when that's just what killed my kids? And
Yeah.
second of all, why would I die right now? How does that honor my children in any sort
Yeah.
of way?" And again, I think that gentleman that came up to you, that was so wise and just so profound, because we do get stuck in this cycle where we feel like there's no escape. We're just going to be grieving for the rest of time. And if we get stuck, then we're not honoring the people that we love in the best way possible.
That's
And I
right.
know you talk about it in the book too, where there are definitely thoughts that go through your head as to, well, if I do try to keep going right now, am I am I really qualified to keep going? Am I really qualified to give advice to my grandkids right now if I couldn't keep my son safe? If and these are, again, not true, but these are just the kind of thoughts that I have. And we lie to ourselves so much, which can
Yeah.
be so devastating. And I want to transition it into one of the most powerful aspects of the book that you talked about, is the way that we talk to ourselves and the
Yeah.
narratives that we choose to use, and how if we just switch our mindset around and we start talking positively to ourselves, and we start telling ourselves that we are strong and we will have strength through Christ and we have strength through God and we can get through anything, how that changes for you. I'm still going throughout that journey right now. I talk to myself really negatively a lot,
Yeah.
in all aspects of life. I always tell myself that I'm not good enough, in my relationships personally, whether that be as a family man or just friends, what have you. When it comes to doing this, I always think, oh, I'm not good enough to be having these kinds of conversations. And who am I to be having these kinds of conversations? And I'm and notoriously negative, and I feel it in my literally in my bones sometimes, where I feel weighed down. I feel like I don't want to get up, I don't want to move around, because it's just the way that I'm talking to myself. But when I was reading through the book and I saw the way that you framed it, it just kind of clicked for me a little bit, where I said to myself,
Good.
if I just try to be positive, I try to be overly positive to the point where it's almost nauseating, it's going to make a change in the way that I view myself. And I've already, I mean, I finished the book a couple of days ago, and I've already started to just lay the groundwork where I'm being more positive, just more affirmations towards myself. And I'm noticing a difference. And
Good.
the way that you have gone about it yourself, was it affirmations that you would give to yourself? Was it anything that maybe you would write down, maybe like a journal prompt or something like that? Maybe it was conversation that you had with a family member or with Lisa or anybody. How was the process of changing your mindset around to get out of the phase of saying, oh my gosh, if I try to carry on right now, how am I honoring Mitch the best way that I can? To saying, okay, I have to carry on because this is what I need to do to honor Mitch.
Yeah, those are great questions. The big thing is, I had this. I work in neurosurgery, right, in neuroscience, and but I work in that field, and so I had this everyday living proof in my practice, and the research that we were doing, and the building we were in. Even, it was a functional brain imaging research center, so I could go down and watch somebody get a brain scan, for example, a
Mm-hmm.
functional MRI, and there's this cool medicine you can give somebody, and you can put them in this MRI machine, and you can tell them to think about something like think about what you smell when your mom bakes cookies, and you could see the parts of their brains that light up when they think about these certain things. And then you can say, think about something that makes you sad or really angry, and you could see different parts of their brain light up, and that means that the neurotransmitters in your brain behave differently in response to the things that you choose to think about, right?
Yeah.
So it's not silly, and it's not just positive thinking or self-help when we say that. You can change your brain by changing how you think. It's true. Like, you literally change the chemical makeup of your brain, and the chemical makeup of your brain, dopamine and serotonin and GABA and all that, or GABA and all these other neurotransmitters, are the things that make you feel the things that you feel in your life. Okay. And
Yeah.
this is really important. I'm not trying to get too nerdy here, but it's really important
Please
because
do. Yeah, please do.
there is a generational thing. It's not your generation. Every generation, when they're younger, believes that what we feel leads us to what is true. And from neuroscience, we know that what you feel usually leads you away from what's true. Like,
Mm-hmm.
feelings are not facts. Feelings are neurochemical events in your brain that may or may not be pointing you towards something that's true. And we are not designed to act on our feelings. We are designed to act in order to change our feelings. And so
Yeah.
what that means is, when I would see these patients who were able to change their neurochemistry by changing how they think, at the same time, I was able to say to myself, I got to do that too, because I know that feelings aren't facts. And I know that by a factor of 5 to 1, the thoughts that we have automatically after trauma and tragedy and these big things happen,
Yeah.
those thoughts that pop into your head are usually not true. They usually are like you said, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I wasn't a good enough dad. I should have been there. I should have stopped it. None of that was true. So, what you have to do then, and affirmations and journaling and all those things are helpful tools, but the most important thing is to understand that you are in control. You can be in control of teaching your brain how to think healthier thoughts, and you can be in control of making your thoughts direct better chemical events to occur in your brain. And for young people like you, if you're listening and you're young and you haven't had children yet, or you're just starting to have families or thinking about it, now we know from animal studies, and that's been backed up with studies in humans and Holocaust survivors and PTSD victims from Vietnam, that you can literally change the DNA in your reproductive cells in response to the things that you experience, think, and feel and do in your life. And it will change genetic markers in your children that baseline programs how they think when they're born. And here's a good example of that. This is
Wow.
terrifying almost, but it's also encouraging. There's a study done in mice where they give these mice a smell, a chemical that smells like cherries, and it's real strong to mice. And when they react to it by twitching their nose hairs and they can tell that they smell this cherry, they would shock them. And so they taught these mice over time to be afraid of the smell of cherry blossoms. And what they found was that the first and second and third generation offspring of these mice that had been shocked in response to cherry blossom had genetic changes, and they were afraid of cherry blossom smells, even if they had never been shocked when they smelled them, down to 4 generations. Which means that some of the things that you deal with, Tom, some of the things you're afraid of, and some of the things you're nervous about, or some of the things that cause you pain, are
Yeah.
because your parents were afraid of those things and because your grandparents were afraid of those things. And you never even
Wow.
experienced them, but you've got some baseline stuff that you're dealing with that was because of what happened to your mom and dad and grandparents. Okay. So that's important. It's been verified in human studies. And the good news is you can train those mice to not be afraid anymore, and their kids aren't afraid. So, what that tells us is that learning how to think differently changes the generations of our families and how resilient they are to trauma, right? That's important. But for you and for me, not our future generations, but for now, it's important not just to be positive and not just to tell yourself positive things. It's important to tell yourself true things that are bent towards positivity. So
Yeah.
that's really an important difference. You can say things like, I can do anything I want to. That's positive, but it's not really true. Like, I can't be an Olympic pole vaulter. I can't. I'm
Yeah.
not built for that. I can't be a mountain climber. I can't climb Mount Everest at 54 without oxygen. I can't do that, no
Mhm.
matter how much I want to. So, me telling myself those positive things wouldn't be true. And the problem is when you tell yourself positive things that aren't true, is you develop cognitive dissonance, which is this situation that you have where you want to believe something and you know it isn't true at the same time, and that creates stress, right? So when
Yeah.
you're giving yourself positive affirmations and positive things, make sure that those things are actually true. And so after you lose a child or after you go through something big, you have to say, yes, I've got to find a way to get my feet back on the ground. I've got to find a way to start moving forward. I know I can do that because other people have done it. And I
Yeah.
know I can do it because the Bible says I can do it. And I can find examples in the Bible of people doing it. And I know I have to do it. So then I've got to seek the ways that I can change my thinking to enable me to achieve that goal that's achievable because someone else has done it, right? So I think that's the long answer to your question. Is it is really important to think more positively, as long as you do it in a way that's true and as long as you do it in a way that's healthy. So I
Yeah.
learned and teach people now this concept of self brain surgery, which I is sort of a funny thing to say, but it's because we know that it really changes your brain chemistry. Then you really are doing surgery on your brain when you think differently. You really are
Yeah.
changing your brain. So I teach people what I call the thought biopsy, which is, since we know that most of the thoughts that pop into your head aren't true, if you can pause for a second, and if you're listening and not watching, I'm doing the timeout signal with my hands. You pause for a second when you have a thought that's negative, and you grab it, and like I would do in the operating room, put it under the microscope and look at it and say, is this thought true? And if it's not true, then I need to get rid of it and transplant something that is true. Like when I have that thought that says, I wasn't a good enough dad or Mitch would still be alive, I have to say, that's not true. He was grown. He was in another city. He was working somewhere else. He was not close enough to me at that time geographically for me to have made a difference in what happened to him. It's not true that he died because I wasn't a good dad. It's not a true
Yeah.
thought. It's
Yeah.
harmful, right? And if the problem is if you start believing and reacting and responding to thoughts that aren't true, then you start building your life around stuff that isn't true, and that's going to lead you into a negative outcome. There's no way you can end up on a positive place by starting out with a lie and chasing a lie down a rabbit hole. You can't end up in a good place. So then you got to learn and discipline yourself to not react and respond to every thought that pops into your head, but to develop a discipline of critically examining your thinking and responding only to those things that are true, or if they are true and negative, then you find a way to make atonement for it or change it or direct it back towards something that's healthy and helpful. Sorry, my dog barked.
Yeah.
That's healthy and helpful, and you'll find your way back towards something that's not only positive but also achievable.
Sorry, I just need a second. Wow. This is probably the first time that I've been podcasting that you've just changed my mind on the spot. I absolutely resonated with what you said about how we call things the truth that aren't the truth. And I've heard you talk about this phenomenon before where people more than ever are saying, well, it's my version of the truth, so it's the truth.
Yeah,
And it's more of a conviction that we hold that we'll define as the truth. But just because it's the truth for you doesn't mean it's the truth for me, doesn't mean it's a universal truth.
yeah,
And I was going to comment on that, but then you just took it one step further. I want to comment on this. And what you just completely changed about my perspective on life as a whole is when I talk negatively to myself, it's going to sound weird. It's going to sound like it makes no sense, but this is how I view it with myself. When I talk negatively to myself, I feel like I'm not impacting anybody. Like I can be mean to
yeah,
myself and I'm the only one who will know it because I think I'm pretty good at hiding it a lot, where I could be really mean to myself. My family won't know unless I really want them to know. My friends won't know unless I want them to know. And strangers will have no idea because they just don't know me enough. And
yeah.
that's the way I've been going about my life, as if I'm not really hurting anybody besides myself. And I kind of talk negatively to myself under this guise that if I talk negatively to myself, then I'll push myself harder or something like that.
Yeah,
But the way you just described it in science too, that if I continue to do that, I am impacting somebody. They're just not born yet.
that's right.
um, and the way I relate it to is my friends love to tease me a lot because I really enjoy exercise and working out. And I'm past the stage in life where I'm not competing in anything anymore besides like signing up to do runs and stuff like that. They're
Yeah,
like, why do you go so hard all the time in the gym? Like you could tone it down a little bit. Like you can eat some ice cream and you can not
yeah,
work out 6, 7 days a week. And the answer that I've come up for myself is, well, I want to lay the groundwork right now so that when I get to the age where I am a dad, I will never have to worry about can I do something physically with my kid. That's been
yeah.
my motivation as of recently because I don't have that competitive motivation anymore. And the way you just framed it in my mind for me now is if I continue to talk negatively to myself, just continuing to go forward, I'm going to have a significant impact on the relationship with my child that I don't want to have.
That's right.
Um, and you just completely changed my whole perspective on the world, honestly.
Good
And I
that
have
my
a,
work here is done. Yeah.
I was gonna say we can cut it now. We're done. um, but yeah, I have a lot to think about after this podcast is over, and I definitely have a lot to work on rewiring in my brain. Because you just shed a whole new light on how really negative I've been towards myself, and thank you for that. Um,
And thank you.
yeah, seriously, thank you. I want to transition it again to something from the book where we hear words that get told to us and maybe we have a reaction to it where somebody's trying to tell you that this is how they see the world and it's the truth. And at the time, we don't agree with it, but maybe later on we see it different. So you talk about a situation in the book where you're talking with your pastor John, and he
Yeah.
says something to you, and it's along the lines of making an idol out of your pain and acknowledging that death is extraordinarily ordinary is powerful. And at the time, you wrote in the book how you heard that and it took away from the acknowledgement of what had happened. And you
Yeah.
said to yourself, how could this be true? Like, this just happened to me. Of course, I want to focus on it. This is all that I can think about. This is something that's extraordinary. And I don't want to focus on how this is happening to so many other people. Now, being many years removed from that conversation with Pastor John, have those words settled in differently? And do you have a different perspective on what he was saying to you at the time?
Absolutely. And this is It was a sensitive thing because he was being kind. He was trying to help me understand. And the story you're referring to was the first time I did surgery after Mitch died. It was a young boy who got hurt, and I had to save his life, and I didn't want to. Like, I mean, I didn't. I don't mean to say I didn't want to save his life. I didn't want to have to work yet. I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
But we were in a kind of a remote location, and if I didn't take care of him, he didn't have time to get somewhere else. He didn't have time for a helicopter to save him. He was going to die. And so I took care of him and saved his life. And then afterwards, Pastor John took me to the chapel, and we had this conversation where I was I was angry that I was able to save somebody else's kid, but I couldn't save my son, and it made me feel bad. Not that I saved the boy, but that I couldn't save my boy.
Yeah.
Um, and I said that. I said, "This is an extraordinary thing to have to be burdened with and to deal with." And he said, "I want you to understand something. Like, it's really dangerous to place the thing that hurts you in the biggest position in your life. That's essentially idolatry." And we could have that conversation because he'd earned my trust, and we were both Christians, and we'd had lots of deep conversations like that. It wouldn't be a good thing to say to somebody you didn't really know. But he said, idolatry is anything that you put in your face and spend more time focusing on and give it more power than you give God. Like, if God's not able to solve your problem because it's too big, you think it's too big for him, then that's become an idol to you.
Yeah.
And he said, I just want you to understand that this pain for you is the extraordinarily biggest thing that's ever happened in your life. But right here in this building today, somebody else has lost a child, somebody's had a stillborn baby, somebody's had a heart attack and passed away, and magnify that out to Atlanta and New York and all over the world. And literally millions of people have gone through something similar to what you went through today. So this extraordinary thing for you is an ordinary part of the human experience. Everybody goes through things like this. And so understand that if it just happened to you, it would be basically unbearable, and you would have a right to wonder why God allowed it to happen to you. And it would
Yeah.
be right for you to be mad that he singled you out to have this extraordinary thing happen. But the truth is, those things happen to everybody. It's an ordinary part of life. And so the question is not, why did this happen to me? The real question is, why doesn't it really happen more often to us? Right? These big things do happen.
Yeah.
What the answer is that God is able to carry us through these things and to take us to a place someday where they won't happen anymore. So the question is not, why do these things happen? The question is, why have they not already happened? I'm lucky that they haven't happened yet. And now that they are happening, I'm really blessed that I have a God who can help me manage it.
Yeah. Again, really powerful. And allowance is the word that I want to focus on in that response,
Yeah.
where I think a lot of young people get confused, again, if we're defining terms, where they'll confuse allowance with plan, where they think,
Yeah.
how could a God plan for this to happen? Why is this part of his plan for the universe, as opposed to God allowing this to happen? And I think that's a key
Yeah.
distinction that a lot of young people get confused with all the time. And that's what really turns people off from religion, is that they think, how could a God plan for this to happen? How could a God sit down and write down the script and say, okay, this is what's going to happen on, what's today, July 7th, 2023? And they don't understand. How did you come to understanding allowance versus a plan?
Well, I think the first thing is, and this sounds, it may sound silly, but the first thing is, be very careful with ascribing things to God, even motives or behaviors, unless you've spent enough time in his book to understand what he says about himself and what is written and true about him. So society wants to tell us a lot of things about God, like, oh, he'll never give you anything more than you can handle, for example. That's not in the Bible.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that. The Bible is full of stories of God giving you things more than you can handle, so that you'll understand that only he can handle them. That you really need to trust him because he's bigger than you are, and he can handle these big things that you can't handle. That's the whole point. So the first thing is, be careful ascribing things to him, because you can actually demotivate and hurt yourself by asking things of God that he never said, or ascribing or attributing things to him that he never promised and that he does not do, that are outside of his character. So that being said, the truth is, if you get to know his word, the The problem is that man has fallen, and there is sin, and there is evil in the world, and we are in the middle of a long story of him redeeming that and overcoming it and putting us in a place where we don't have to deal with it anymore. And in my work, I see every day the effect of evil on people. I see people that drink and drive, and people that beat their wives up, and people that do horrific things, and other people get hurt because of it. And it's not because God is out there allowing these things to happen. It's the evidence of the fact that we live in a fallen world. And
Yep.
God's already told us what's going to happen in the end and how he's going to overcome that. And he's already paid for it, and he's working desperately to redeem us. And that story ends with us winning. We're going
Yeah.
to win in the end. And so it's not that God singles any of us out and says, okay, I'm going to smite you because you committed this sin. I'm going to smash you or kill your son. He doesn't do that. He never does that.
Yeah.
He allows us to live in a world that's very broken, and he comes alongside us. Psalm 34:18, and I feel this in my bones because it felt it after he died, after Mitch died. He says, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, Tom. He's not out there trying to hurt you. He's out there trying to be close to you when you're hurting, and
Yeah.
he will be close to you when you're hurting if you ask him to be. So I think that's another long-winded answer to your, because you're asking some big questions. I'm so encouraged that there's young people who are fighting through this stuff with me. He doesn't allow, he doesn't cause, he is in the middle of redeeming the reasons why these things happen, and in each case when they do happen, he wants to get involved in it and help us through it.
I love that you mentioned Psalm 34. I wrote it down too. And the second part of that, when someone is hurting or brokenhearted, the Eternal moves in close and revives him in his pain.
Yep.
It, it's something that it's so powerful. And I think, again, young people can't comprehend the scope of what's going on. It's impossible to. I actually made a video about how it's impossible to understand everything that's going on. It's
Uh-huh.
straight out of Job, where God shows Job, this is the universe and this is everything that's going on. You can't possibly understand what's going on here.
That's
And
right.
then Job goes back and he says, I trust you anyway. And I think it kind of relates to another character in your book who was quite the character in Lucky Chuck.
Yeah.
Um, he seemed like a pretty interesting guy to get to know, but it's
Yeah.
his indomitable spirit and his trust in God. And I don't want to go too much into his story because that he was the character in the book that really resonated with me as to just what it looks like to have complete trust and faith. And I think a lot of people, like we've said multiple times already, will claim that they have that trust and claim that they have that faith. But the second they get hit with the curveball, then it's gone in an instant.
Yeah.
And it was, did you really have it in the first place? Or were you just pretending to? And I don't know if there is an answer to this question, but I'm interested to see, was there a moment that you knew in your life that you had 100% confidence that guy was going to be there no matter what?
I think we all decide that often, and then
Yeah.
we decide it's not true too. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
don't for a second think that Lisa or me or any of us had this all dialed in. I mean, I'm 10 years out from losing my son next month.
Mhm.
August 20th will be 10 years, and there are still days when I'm so mad and so angry and so upset and so hurt. It never stops. So what happens is over time it becomes sort of a part of you, but not all of you, right?
Yeah.
But what happens is right after the event, I think you would be probably a little crazy if you didn't doubt, if you didn't say, "Wait, God, I thought I was doing pretty good. I thought my life was going pretty well. I thought I tried to do everything right. Why did this happen to me? Why did you let this happen to me?" That's a normal thing. So don't beat yourself up if you have doubt. In fact, my
Yeah.
favorite guy in the Bible is the story of Mark, where this guy comes to Jesus and he's trying to get him to save his child. And Jesus said, anything's possible if you believe. And he said, I do believe, but help me with my unbelief. Like in the same breath, he says, I believe and I don't believe all at the same time. And that's where most of us really are. I mean, most of us
Yeah.
really live there in this place where we believe and we have faith and we doubt and we're angry and we have fear all at the same time. So what we want is then to be building a life where we're continually moving a little closer to that place where we're more resilient. And you mentioned Lucky Chuck, and not what I learned from him was there's this crazy Wyoming rancher who developed brain cancer, and his wife had previously died of breast cancer. And she told him, Wanda told Chuck, when she first got sick, she said, make some decisions right now. Get real about what you believe about God and about faith and all those things and figure that stuff out, because you're going to need to fall back on it if I get really sick and die. And that's not the time that you want to be mad at God or shaking your fist at him or walking away from your faith. That's when you're going to want to hold on to him, because you're going to need a rock to stand on when life really hurts you. And that really helped me kind of frame and understand what happened to us after Mitch. Like, the reason that we made it through was because we had decided, when I went through PTSD and when I went through a divorce and all those things in the past, we had decided what we really believed. And so
Yeah.
when Mitch happened, when we lost Mitch, yeah, there was doubt and there was anger and all of that, but I knew where the floor was. Like, I knew what was solid underneath my feet. God was not going to let me fall. He wasn't going to let this thing become overwhelming and define my life. He was going to help me find my way back. And it might take a while, but it was going to happen. I just knew it because of the previous experiences I'd had. And that's why I define hope as this idea of memory and movement, right? You remember, this
Yeah.
isn't the first hard thing I've been through. Other people have made it through these things. God makes promises that turn out to be true, and I'm going to move towards those things. I'm going to take some action and try to flex that muscle to generate hope, because hope is an action word. It's not a passive thing. You fight for it and you'll find it.
Yeah. That's something I'm actively trying to do today, is that
Good.
combination of remembering all the times that have happened so far in my life. I know I'm only 23, but they've happened already. And as unfortunate
Yep.
as it's been, where you have the circumstances come about, and just seeing those forms of divine intervention and remembering where it's been, whether it's been in the scripture, whether it's been in your relationships or something that you've seen, and then moving towards it, and not just moving towards it myself, but also helping other people move towards it. I think that's one of the main initiatives behind the podcast, whether it's
Yeah.
talking about Christianity in the podcast or whether it's just talking about how I find success in other aspects of my life, helping others move towards it. And again, I think that's something that you're really doing here. And this has been one of the most profound books that I've read. I told you this is coming at a really good time in my life. My family
Good.
is going through a period of loss right now. We're all
I'm sorry.
still kind of dealing with it, trying to find our way through it, what's working, what's not working. And it's been a really tough period for me, just kind of
Mm.
comprehending my own relationship with God, understanding what I thought was true, maybe isn't. Maybe I thought I had a much stronger relationship than I did. Again, it's something that you talk about in the book of the different types of grievers, and I think I'm definitely one of those dippers. Where right now I'm
Yep. Me
towards
too.
I'm on the upswing,
Good.
but yeah, but it's definitely a journey, and it's a journey that I'm very happy to be on, and it's one that if I wasn't on, I really don't know what kind of person I would be if I was trying to go through this by myself. And I mean that both in the physical world and the spiritual world. If I was by myself in terms of not being able to talk to anybody, whether it's family, whether it's on the podcast or anything like that, or
Yeah.
whether it's talking to God, I don't think I would have been able to make it through, honestly. I think it would have just been a miserable time. And
Oh,
these types of conversations make it really easy. And thank you a lot for today. And before we go, I want to just talk about your podcast a little bit because I think it's great. I think the newsletter is
thank
great.
you.
I think everything that you do is fantastic. And you certainly have made a fan out of me, that's for sure.
Oh, thank you,
And
Tom.
of course, and you've been doing this for such a long time. And you have been asking tough questions to guests for years. I'm interested to kind of put a little spin zone on that, where the book is now asking of you to ask yourself tough questions about what you thought you know, what you think you know. What's the one question that you had to ask yourself throughout this whole process that was the toughest for you to come up with a real solidified answer?
Wow. That's a you did it. You found a hard question for me. Honestly, I think the thing is this. As much as I hate to say it out loud, I think we all really wonder if it's true that there's something after this life. I think in our heart of hearts, no matter how hard we try, I think we all really wonder, like, is it just lights out when we die and none of this stuff matters, and or is it really true that there's a resurrection and an eternal life and all that stuff? And for me, losing Mitch was the biggest challenge for a little while in really deciding if I believe that. And I had a podcast guest on my show years ago. I don't even know if the episode's available anymore. I need to bring it back. A guy named Gordon Livingston. And Gordon was a psychiatrist who lived in Baltimore, and he lost his two sons in 13 months. His older
Oh
boy
my
committed
gosh.
suicide. And then his younger son, who was only 8, developed leukemia and needed a bone marrow transplant. And Gordon was a match. So Gordon gave his son bone marrow, and the boy had an allergic reaction to the bone marrow and died as a complication of the bone marrow transplant from his father. So you can imagine what that did to Gordon.
Yeah.
Gordon was an atheist at the time, and he started writing books about his pain and his grief and all that. And in the course of dealing with losing those 2 boys, he came to this place where he so desperately needed to believe that there was a way he could see them again, because he felt responsible for his older son committing suicide. Felt responsible for his younger son dying because he died of his own bone marrow, right? And he needed to find a way to get to be with them again. And he found Christianity, and he never actually came out and said, I've decided to become a Christian. What he said was, this is what passes for hope for me, that there's a God who will allow me to see my sons again. And he came to some sort of peace with his life. And when he said that to me, and then lost my son Mitch, I said, it's not just what passes for hope, like that defines hope to me. Like this idea that there is a resurrection and we get to live eternally and all these tears will be wiped away and all this stuff is true. That if that's true, then all these other promises are true too. And I can work myself backwards to finding a way to move forward every day by grabbing one promise and holding on to it, like Psalm 34:18 that we talked about. And even the really hard ones like Romans 8:28, which is all things work together for good for those that love the Lord. And people throw that at you when something bad happens, like, oh, it's going to work out for good. The Bible says so. That's a terrible thing to say to somebody right after their son dies, because it's not good and it won't ever be good that my son died. But I'll tell you something, Tom, that came out of podcasting. 2 different times in the 10 years that I've been doing this, I've received emails from somebody who said, Doc, today was the day I was going to kill myself. In your podcast, you said something, and I'm not going to now. You changed my mind about that. And so that's a good thing that has come out of the loss of my son, because I started trying to redeem that loss by writing and podcasting. There's 2 people who are alive today because of that. And if I hadn't lost him, I wouldn't have done those things. And those 2 people hopefully would have found some other way to hope. But the fact is, it's not a good thing that Mitch died. It never will be a good thing, but good has come of it. And that's part of this redemption process that we're in the middle of, that long story arc that we talked about a while ago. God is redeeming all of this pain and all of this hardship and all the things that you're going through and all the questions you have as a young person, and listener, wherever you are in the world, just know this, like there are some true things that you can grab onto. And if you'll just test them out, they will turn out to be the most reliable things in your life when the massive thing does happen. Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. And the world right now wants to say, you can grab your truth and I'll grab my truth and we'll grab somebody else's truth and we'll figure it out. But the fact is, if you think you're walking north and you're walking east, it doesn't matter how much you believe that's north. You're walking east and you're not going to get where you think you're going. That's just
Yeah.
not true. And you need something that's really true. That's what Lucky Chuck taught me. That's the answer to the question you just asked me. I decided that it was really true, that there is a redemption, there is a resurrection, and that comes through the person and the promise of Jesus Christ, who is the way and the truth and the life. And I got to hold on to that. And if it turns out that I'm wrong and my eyes close someday and nothing happens, I'll never know it. But if it
Yeah.
turns out I'm right and you made a different decision, it'll turn out differently for you. So test it out, prove it out, follow the thing that says it's true, and make sure you prove that it is true, and make sure that you're building your life on something that can't be taken from you. And that's what I learned from losing my son.
Wow. Once again, a massive thank you to Dr. Warren for joining me for today. I've really never had an experience quite like this while podcasting, and it was truly special. If you enjoyed today's conversation and you want to see even more incredible conversations going forward, please follow along, leave a rating. It really is the best way to help grow the show, and I can't thank you enough for being a supporter. Until next time, I'll see you.